Insecurity and conflict are on the rise. Human activity is putting the natural environment under more stress than ever before. It is an increasingly toxic mix. The number of armed conflicts around the world has doubled in just 10 years. So has the number of people displaced from their homes. Spending on arms is increasing, global hunger is growing. At the same time, environmental crises are adding new risks to security. Drought leads to failed crops, floods force people from their homes, ocean ecosystems die. The twin security and environmental crises are creating new, complex risks and compromising our prospects of achieving and maintaining peace. The result? A new era of risk. Unless we take action, the situation will only get worse. There is a way forward. It is possible to build the foundations of a new security, and it begins by acknowledging that we need to tackle the twin crises together. We must address the root causes of the environmental crisis, cutting carbon emissions quickly, reducing pollution, restoring forests, protecting nature. However, solutions meant to address environmental issues can have unintended negative impacts on peace and security. We must enable a green transition that is both just and peaceful, with policies that avoid sparking new opposition or conflicts. Governments need to switch spending from things that fuel the twin crises, such as building their armed forces and fossil fuel subsidies, to activities that restore the environment and build peace. Environmental integrity and peace are inextricably linked. By addressing them together, we ensure that measures aimed at solving one problem don't make the other worse. Ideally, they would create positive synergies. The Environment of Peace report explores options for building peace in this new era of risk based on principles of urgency, fairness, and far-sightedness. It makes recommendations that everyone can use, from the United Nations to governments, from financial institutions to civil society. The need is urgent and time is running out. Find out how we can build an environment of peace.
I think we're on the other table.
Move on, next table.
You're on the next table.
Am I with her?
Yeah.
Oh, we're sharing a table.
So I think we're ready to start, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to Stockholm on this beautiful May Day. My name is Margot Wallström, and I had the honor to chair the International Advisory Panel for this SIPRI project, Environment of Peace. And we will present and launch the ready-made report. Hold it up, Dan, so that everybody can see it smells new. And we hope it will never smell dust, because it will stay on a shelf somewhere. You will instead read it and learn from it, we hope. And here with me today, on stage, are a few people that will help me with the presentation. Ilwad Elman stands right here with me, and maybe you know her from before. She's a Somalian-Canadian social activist. She's also the CEO of the Elman Peace and Human Rights Center in Mogadishu, and has already a long career working on these issues. I don't know if we call it a career, but a long time working on these issues. Javeria Kella is next to her, senior officer at the WWF-Pakistan, and she has also worked on human rights and peace-building issues in several countries, and she has also been part of the Young Advisors Group to our helping our project. And Dan Smith, welcome Dan, Director of SIPRI, with long record of research and publication on these matters, conflict and peace issues. And I would say also the initiator of this project. So you're the one to honor or blame, but I hope it's to honor you that we will now present this report. What is the aim of this report? And why is it important that you are here and listening to us today? Well, the aim is, of course, to raise international understanding of the risks to peace and security linked to our changing environment, and also to inspire positive action to manage those risks. And this is why you are the real VIPs here. We hope that you will also become our best allies in the work from here onwards. It is easy to project doom and gloom, especially if you read some of the facts. Well, you can open the newspaper or read social media, and you will find the rather breathtaking facts and figures about what is happening to our world. Some of them you saw already in the short video, because we have spotted two crises and a deficit in this report. And the crisis, of course, is first of all a darkening security horizon, and that in a time where we live with a war that is raging, a barbaric war that is raging in Ukraine, so close to us here. And at the same time, we know that in the last 10 years, the number of conflicts and also the conflict deaths and displaced people has doubled in the last 10 years. And the world spends more than $2 trillion now on the military. And I think we will see it raises further from the security situation that we have. And at the same time, we also have an acute environmental crisis. Species extinction is 10 to 100 times faster than in the last 10 million years. The biomass loss has reached 60 to 75% since 1970, and a third of the soil worldwide is degraded. So these are just some of the facts and figures that form sort of the case studies that we've made and the situation and state of play on this planet. And it creates a human crisis, of course, with so many millions of people being displaced. I saw the figure now is 100 million people being refugees. The water scarcity and the links between those two crises. The least peaceful countries are also those experiencing the highest number of ecological threats. And what we've seen as a deficit is a governance deficit. Why doesn't world leaders react to those facts? Why is it so difficult to do the right things? Well, when I will just give you my very short summary, and then I will leave it to my fellow panelists here to give you a little more insight. But I tried to summarize it in a few ups. So start by listen up, maybe, and then what we want is for leaders to step up, first of all. Ensure that when they address environmental problems, they also promote peace, and vice versa. Build up. You have to prepare by investing in preparedness and resilience. This is what has to be the starting point. You have to do more of transboundary agreements, for example, on water. You have to create the structures and systems that help. You have to link up, because cooperation is absolutely needed. And as we know, environmental problems knows no borders. It follows a wind or a river, and that is why countries have to work together. Look up. because throughout this report runs the knowledge that you have to work with people. You have to prepare groups of people, for example, indigenous peoples, when you plan reform or when you want to change something. So beware of potential negative social impacts and conflict risks, and be deliberately inclusive. Pay up. That's an important advice. Finance peace and meet funding obligations on climate change and environmental issues. The poorest countries get so little of the money for adapting to climate change. And, of course, never give up. That's maybe my last up. Now I think we go straight to Ilwad, and you give us thank you for everything that you've been doing and contributing, and give us your take on the report.
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I've been involved with the Stockholm Forum for Peace and Development for 2 or 3 years now, but this is the first time we're actually here in person, so it's wonderful to see you all here and to be able to have this very important and timely conversation. I've just arrived from Somalia, where I work as a Chief Operating Officer at the Elman Peace Center and a proud member of this initiative, the Environment of Peace. With all protocols duly observed and with recognition to the short time that we have, allow me to just dive straight into it. From my perspective, having now already heard the key messages of the report that's being launched today, over the past decade, the global climate crisis has created a cycle of drought and flooding in Somalia, with the ensuing scarcity in natural resources exacerbating conflict within my country. The Elman Peace Center was founded in 1990, and we spent the last 3 decades serving on the front lines of this conflict by promoting peace, cultivating grassroots leadership, and empowering women, and disarming youth that have been co-opted into armed groups in the early 90s by warlords, but now more recently by groups like Al-Shabaab and ISIS. And often their reason for joining are either forced conscription, but also survival and sustenance. And at times, this is due to a resource scarcity and having to provide for themselves and for their families. A situation that we are facing today, not unique to Somalia alone, but has been ongoing for way too long, with too many cycles of humanitarian and environmental crises, and even now we are on the brink of a looming famine and a current drought that has put Somalia in a state of a national emergency. My organization, through its work, is providing programs for women's empowerment, vocational training, civic engagement, but Elman Peace has fought tirelessly to address the symptoms of climate instability. Somewhat ad hoc, with little support, with very few frameworks to guide our peace-building work to be more climate resilient, and this is the case for many grassroots actors. We need a framework, a set of key principles, which this report outlines, with humility, with a global focus, and that underlines the imminence of the action that is inclusive of those that have the most to lose and that are the most affected by these issues. The hazards are increasing. There are more conflicts around the world today. There are more displaced people and higher expenditures than a decade ago. In addition to Ukraine, where obviously the world has much of its attention on right now, we're also seeing the same situation in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Yemen, in Chad, Somalia. And those are just some of the 56 active armed conflicts that are happening today. You may be wondering why we are talking about peace and security in a conversation about the environmental crisis, but it's important, and I can't stress this enough, that these two crises are feeding each other. And we heard from Her Excellency already, and soon we'll hear from Dan, the science, the evidence, and all of the work that went into assembling this report that I truly believe presents actionable policy recommendations that are inclusive, so that people like myself, local peace builders that are not academics, that are not scientists, that are not inherently environmental activists, can use to better guide our work. We need to move away from thinking that these two issues are siloed. Nevertheless, horrific global issues, but recognize that the interlinkage and the response that we need right now has to be more than lip service. We need to socialize and eventually implement the principles that we have rigorously debated and researched empirically and promote cooperation. To realize that there is a way out of this. Like we heard just now, there is hope at the end of the tunnel. But it requires multilateral cooperation. And it requires financial resources. And we need to leverage the uniquely but devastating time that we find ourselves in currently. This is the time to act. With conflicts, a global pandemic, unilateralism, more countries turning inwards instead of cooperating. This presentation today is not just about a body of work that I've been very proud to have been a part of, but really it's an appeal. It's an appeal to all of you in this room to work with us, to build a lasting environment of peace. The evidence that you will see in this report shows that social and political instability generated when these two twin crises meet, left unresolved, can and do escalate into violence. In my country, it certainly does. We at the Elman Peace Center have been working with the Northwestern University in Chicago, with students and faculty in the Access to Health department to support our staff and other peace builders across Africa, in the Sahel, in the Lake Chad Basin, that are on the ground in designing targeted and sustainable interventions to support marginalized communities that are affected by conflict and environmental issues. Since 2020, we've been partnering with them on a variety of research projects focused on encouraging climate resilience practices, and we've gotten access to timely data and research, and we've even co-developed some solutions in what can practically work given the challenging circumstances that we're all operating in, but are led by indigenous communities. And I raise this because access to data, statistics, and that analytics should not be gatekept by the international community. Whilst we are subjected to constant consultations and idea mining, the results and the information of that doesn't come back to us to help inform our work. And it took us to develop a fruitful partnership with a university in America, all the way from Somalia. Because peace builders like myself, unfortunately, don't have access, or sometimes even the skills to interpret this information beyond what we see manifesting before our eyes every day and how it's affecting our communities. These communities that look to us for support, for services, and solutions. In September 2021, I addressed the UN Security Council and stated that the world is in a climate emergency. And I requested that the international community support us in climate resiliency at the local and regional levels by empowering frontline activists and local practitioners. We all know how that resolution ended with the veto, but our resolve certainly didn't end there. And I think I can speak on behalf of the entire panel when I say that it has further bolstered our commitment to this cause. In pursuit of that goal, we in Somalia are working on developing a peace-building toolkit, a training curriculum to empower practitioners at the local and grassroots level to adapt our security programs, not redevelop them or change them because they are impactful in the peace and security space, but adapt them to address the environmental degradation that we are seeing so that our peace-building work can be more sustainable. And those agreements and some of the head nods that I'm seeing around in this room right now already are ones I've seen before. The resources to actually implement these solutions are not yet available to local practitioners. One of our key recommendations in this report, as you've heard, is to finance peace and not risk, and to meet the international funding obligations, ensuring that funding reaches the most fragile communities. Addressing the impact of climate change is a challenge that no one organization alone can do. But we can all do our bit. And that's what we strive to do together in this distinguished panel in developing this report. You will see how cooperation can provide better access to information from traditionally excluded, marginalized, most affected communities, and upstream that information to global policy, so that we're not taking toolkit approaches or resolutions that we've invested years in and trying to force them back down into the communities. I'm a practitioner, and as such, my remarks are often pragmatic, or at least I like to think so. But a thorough understanding of the linkages between climate change and conflict is critical to developing actionable and sustainable programs. And that's what we need right now. And that is what the Environment of Peace report is about. So please, like you heard, listen up, read it, share it. In Somalia, we are currently facing a rapid onset of disasters, such as droughts and floods and long-term environmental degradation, such as soil degradation, desertification, which leads to economic hardships among groups that directly depend on renewable resources. This is further accentuating gender inequalities and increasing competition over natural resources. Climatic events contribute to an increase in population movements, both internal and cross-border, to areas with better livelihoods. And this is creating, again, further conflict between migrants and local residents that are increasing the strain on local resources. Across East Africa, increased migration and changing pastoral mobility patterns due to climate change and environmental degradation have contributed to conflict and violence throughout the region. The scarcity of natural resources to sustain livestock, such as arable lands and access to reliable water sources, has caused many livestock owners to now migrate to areas that are having greener pastures. But this migration is also increasing violence in the recipient areas in two key ways. First, the arrival of the migrants to these places increases an additional burden on the economic resources based in the high migration and the local resources that are already limited. The second is that migration also leads to ethnic tension and, in turn, again, violence, particularly when migrants and residents come from different ethnic groups and they have deep histories of violence. In Somalia, the impact of environmental degradation on increased migration and mobility in the country is undeniable. While historically, the leading cause of displacement, which I'm a victim of as well as a refugee, having left Somalia when I was 2, has been armed conflict. But in 2011, in 2017, in 2019, and now in 2022, we are seeing that the shift towards displacement is due to climatic events following significant droughts. And we are in the exact same position that we were in 10 years ago. And without urgent action, future flooding and droughts leading to further conflict and displacement will happen again. I'm getting a lot of notes from our moderator to wrap it up, but I do want to mention this, that without private or political entities in Somalia have tried to co-opt processes that are meant to design or improve the livelihoods of affected populations, including development projects, well digging, sanitation, or the distribution of humanitarian aid. And all of this just to expand their own influence at the expense of the civilian population. All which we see happening today. In the face of an existential threat, such as climate change, we also need to look at the elite exploitation that's happening as part of this process. But this requires political, legislative reform. And not only programming that's led by peace-building practitioners or civil society organizations or think tanks. I'll end my remarks here very shortly, before I conclude, Your Honorable Chair, by just saying that peace-building practitioners and grassroots indigenous communities, women and youth, they have a rich and well-established history of serving on the front lines to fight and promote peace. Rather than focusing on developing new security programs, these actors, myself included, need to build on this strong foundation that we have within the community and examine how we can enhance our programming to become more climate resilient. This will enable us to address the vastly changing environment in which we live in, that we work in, and that we serve every single day. I'm grateful for your attention. I'm grateful for the extra time, the opportunity to have been a part of this very, very important project, and also to the faculty and the students of the Northwestern University in Chicago that helped us better respond and understand where others have failed or excluded us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ilwad. I did not want to stress you too much because what you did was also to illustrate some of the examples and the facts and what happens on the ground in a country like Somalia with these crises and the deficit compound. So thank you so much, Javeria. Please, thank you for also helping us with expressing young people's views on our project and the advisory group that you belong to.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm truly honored to be part of this panel. So my name is Javeria Kella, and I come from Pakistan. Currently, I'm working with WWF-Pakistan, trying to bring in a human rights-based approach in conservation world. So I will straight jump into it. A lot of you may have heard the news of Pakistan and India going through heat wave. And you know, the extreme heat is really nothing new to us. The melanin may tell that pretty clearly. But these heat waves are different. How are these heat waves different? I grew up in Pakistan, and I would spend a lot of my summers in Third Desert, which is where my family comes from. And in intense heat, it's, again, very normal to us. But this heat wave is very different from the previous ones is because of the early onset. It's only May, and I can tell you my parents back home are in 45 to 60 degrees Celsius. And I'm really happy to be enjoying Swedish weather right now. The early onset, it's rapid, it's very early season, it started in March, April, May, we did not experience spring at all, and it's also the extent of it, the whole subcontinent, that's 1.5 billion people, so 1 in every 8 person in this world right now is going through lethal heat in itself, which is insufferable. Especially with power cuts and a lot of global south majority world realities. So I can tell you that this report is very timely, extremely important, connecting peace and environment as it must be. So yeah, and not only do humans suffer through heat waves, back home even birds are suffering through heat waves. While we may have money and finances to adapt or mitigate things, the birds and the nature does not. So it also comes upon us to not only help ourselves, but help the nature around us. So Pakistan has around 7,000 glaciers. That's the largest number of glaciers beyond the polar regions. I will give another recent example. A very historic bridge in the north of Pakistan collapsed because of melting glaciers and the downpour and the stream essentially taking it away. So when you imagine 7,000 glaciers in a country with poor governance, lack of money, political instability, and a lot of a lot of other problems, you can only imagine the intersection of conflict and climate does not end well. So talking about Hindu Kush, Himalayas, Karakoram, they all come down. They are the source of life. Water is the source of life. I would also say that monsoons are getting less predictable, sometimes more extreme, sometimes less extreme. Again, there are never-ending problems. Talking about climate migration as well, there have been 30 million migrants within Pakistan in the last decade or so. Again, I'm talking about the region that is geopolitically important as well, but also when it comes to population, we represent a huge number of the world. And also talking about Pakistan, I'm sure the India-Pakistan situation is nothing new to most of the peace builders sitting here. But you can again imagine when two countries in the region, both nuclearly powered, have had tensions for past 70 plus years around water. What does that look like in the future when water resources are only declining in that part of the world? With increasing population in that region, we need more energy, we need more food, but with heat waves, the crops are also dying. So again, I will leave it to your imagination of what possibilities can happen in that region. And I want to conclude this part saying that as most of the global south / majority world has not contributed a lot to the climate change situation. Pakistan has contributed only 1% to the global emissions, yet we continue to take the brunt of the most worst polluters in this world. This report has been really important. I do want to thank Carolina for reaching out and involving young people in the process. I think sometimes I feel like I have no option as a young person but to be hopeful, because if I want to imagine a future for myself, I have to be hopeful. This report comes at a timely time in a sense that it brings in a holistic perspective. I personally feel like peace builders often are so tunnel visioned that we forget that peace is not, you cannot have peace in a silo. It needs to be worked with other things. How are we bringing in environment? So I'm hoping that this report can bring in that holistic perspective to peace, that we cannot be at peace if we are at war with the very nature around us and our lands and our ecologies. So I hope, as a lot of peace builders sitting here, we can all bring in more of that in our work. And lastly, I would also say that a lot of the Sufi traditions back home, have embedded peace and environment together. They promote plurality and they promote ecology, whether that's through preserving animals or a lot of the shrines back home around water bodies. Water is not something to be had or moved or stored with dams. It's something that is very essence of life back home and in a lot of other places. So I want to leave all of you with a note on ecological grief. We're all humans, and I think one thing that connects us all, one very human emotion that connects us all is loss. So I guess I want to put it out to the audience, like how many of you have lost someone? How many of you have lost something? Or yeah, just raise your hand if you've lost someone, I guess. So look around you, yeah, me too. So look around yourself, like we have all lost someone, and loss and grief are such human emotions that connect us. And I want us as peace builders to also talk about loss and mental health when it comes to talking about environment. How are we losing our environment? What does it mean to lose the nature around you? And how does that impact us? Oftentimes we talk about how going in the nature like boosts our mental health, but what about the people who have lived in the wild all their life? How does it impact them to see their homeland crumble? Yeah, so I think that's the note that I want to leave you with, to think about loss, to think about grief, and how can we incorporate these conversations as peace builders for our own better mental health, for the health of the world we live in. Yeah, and thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Javeria. You gave us a very beautiful concept or expression, ecological grief. And as we know, the UN Secretary General called the latest IPCC report an atlas of human misery. And I think that we need to mourn also the losses and to understand that this is part of it. Thank you so much. And Dan, you are the one to wrap this up and also give us some more insight into the report.
Well, thank you very much, Margot, and thank you to fellow panelists. Thank you for everybody for being here. And thank you to a team of about 30 researchers, an international panel, a youth advisory group, many other people whom we talked to and took advice from to produce this report. We timed it specifically now to come out now because next week is Stockholm Plus 50, the high-level international conference that's the 50th anniversary of the first such conference on what was at that time called the human environment. And I think that we now understand a little bit more about humanity being a part of the environment, but the environment isn't there for us, even though we get a huge amount from nature. And in the preparation of Stockholm Plus 50, I remember talking with somebody who was quite involved in it, and who said that, yes, it seemed like a very good idea, Dan, what you're doing to connect environment and peace. And I said, that's not what I'm doing, right? How could I connect environment and peace? How could you? How could we? Right? Environment and peace are so inextricably interlinked that if you damage the environment, you damage peace, and vice versa. If you damage peace, you damage the environment. It is not us who is creating a connection. It is not us who is creating this challenge. It is the reality. But the good thing about that inextricable interlinkage is that it works the other way as well. If you enhance peace, you can enhance the environment. If you protect the environment, you can improve the prospects for peace. And I think that we see this, and this is part of what the report is about. And one should say, by the way, this report, I've forgotten how many pages this is now. What is it? It's 93. This is the short report. There is, of course, an executive summary, and it can all be boiled down to a couple of bullet points. But the full scientific report with all the detail in it will come out later this year, and that will be, I think, about 4 times as long as this. And yes, and Claire, who is the magnificent project coordinator, just her face collapsed with misery as I predicted the length of it. But in that report, we go into, in detail, the way in which this interlinkage works. At one level, we're talking about the kind of things that we've heard from Pakistan and from Somalia, and we can see in the Middle East, and we can see in the Sahel, and we can see in the dry corridor of Central America, where what is happening in the environment, what is happening in nature, has an effect on people's living conditions, their livelihood, their water security, their food security, and at worst, generates social instability because the problems are not well responded to by good governance, either at local or national level. And that can contribute on. There are pathways which we have identified by which that can lead, not always, but can lead to violent conflict. And we also see those interconnections at the global level. And when we started on this 2 years ago, we were using the expression a darkening security horizon. And we didn't really know at the point of publication precisely how dark it was going to be. But I think we can very, very clearly see now that a global geopolitical scene in which so much toxin has been introduced is not the one that you would choose if you wanted to work out how to cooperate on these issues. And the challenge that we face is that we need international cooperation more than ever. And the appetite for international cooperation is declining in important places. That's why we need to hear voices. That's why basing ourselves on the evidence, basing ourselves on the reality that is there, we need to speak very loudly and very clearly. From a researcher's point of view, the great thing is that there is much that we still need to understand about this. From a policy actor, politicians, activists, NGOs, private business, whomever's point of view, the fact is we know enough to act now. And we know enough to know that there is no excuse for not acting on this inextricable linkage of environmental issues and peace issues. So I will leave it there. There might be a little bit of time for questions, I don't know, but that's all I've got to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And in the report, we've tried to address sort of the whole chain, starting with education and information and all of those things that have to be there also for young people and everybody. And then to that bigger picture that Dan just pointed out. So I think we will say thank you to my fellow panelists and then open up for questions. You will run with a microphone.
We have also from our online audiences 3 questions. But we give the floor here first.
We start here. Yeah, physical. When we finally can meet, it's amazing to see you all here.
People are not used to putting up real hands. They're only used to putting up electronic ones.
Thank you very much for a beautiful beginning of a launch of a strong report. Will this report be in English only, or will it be translated to the main languages? And if there is anything that we can participate in the process of getting this translated to Arabic, then I'm all ready for that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a good challenge because we have actually been so focused on getting this thing out. And, you know, unfortunately, sometimes when you're wrapped up in the process, you use the expression, we're so focused on getting this damn thing out. But we're so focused on getting this beautiful thing out that we have not actually taken on fully that question. SIPRI's yearbook is translated into 4 other languages. And I think that we should be doing that if we can. So I think that's a next step. To start getting that translated both into the major UN languages, but also a much wider range than that. Perhaps summary versions in order to make it more practical. But yeah, I think we need to go there. Thank you very, very much for raising that.
Good reminder. So we will do that. We will follow up immediately.
So Claire, you're not out of a...
Can I respond to that?
Pardon?
If I can respond to that as well, too, the session that we had earlier with Search for Common Ground, we had a really important question talking about not just language in the different languages that we'll translate the report to, when we talk about inclusivity, when we talk about the environment of peace, but also the jargon. Recognizing that this is an issue that affects youth, women, indigenous communities, illiterate communities, and framing this report in a way that is digestible to all parts of the community. And I think that that's one of our biggest aspirations as well, too, that this will not be just ink on paper, but a guide for you to be able to utilize.
Thank you very much for bringing us together and enriching the world with your report. Mrs. Wallström, you talked to us about the need to step up, link up. And if we would do that around environment of peace, would you recommend that it steps up as a separate work strand with its own, I don't know, task forces, mechanisms, or that it mainstreams itself? But the UNFCCC report does not mention security or peace. UN Security Council, it did not yet adopt its resolution. NATO will establish a climate security center of excellence, but others are saying we shouldn't securitize the issue. How would you recommend we navigate this global theater when we want to raise the action under your report? Thank you.
That's a very tricky question because I think it depends. We need, for example, the UN to make sure that the United Nations can deal with this issue in a particular way, that the Security Council understands it, that they continue to make sure that it is being reported from the field to the Security Council. but also that the existing structures understand fully and can integrate and work on these issues. And we might have different answers to this, but I really think that it depends. A government has to look at the whole range of activities and how do we tackle this? What does it mean? And how do we might need new bodies as well, international bodies, for example, for water management, because I truly believe that that will be one of the biggest challenges for this planet. And unless countries work together, cooperate and find management plans for water resources, it will be very, very difficult and could easily lead to conflicts and even wars. So I think that you need some new bodies and new structures, but I think you can also improve and expand the understanding in some of the existing bodies. But we do have some recommendations also for the UN system, for example. So my answer will have to be sort of more general like that.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it may differ from issue to issue, and it may differ from institution to institution. But one of the things I'd say, one of the things that we've done is we realized that an awful lot of what we wanted to recommend was not just what should be done, but actually how you need to approach the problem in order to figure out the right thing to do. And principle number 3 is expect the unexpected and be prepared to adapt. So I would say that you could translate that in this context that you've just raised to being try it and see. With some institutions, it will work to set up a task force between the different existing bodies. With some, it won't. If you do that, the different existing bodies will ignore it. I mean, there's experience of both. There's experience of mainstreaming working, and there's experience of it just kind of going to flutter away. So, yeah, start it, see if it works. If it does, do it more. If it doesn't, try something else.
But I think also one very important principle in our report is to make sure that you work with people, that you understand that indigenous people must be involved, or that you look at whether women and young people are also included. And it kind of surprised me how important this became in our work, I must say, also for the report. But we understood that it cannot work unless you do this. And so maybe in some countries they say, let's form a group that can make sure that this is implemented. The conclusions of the Environment of Peace report is included in our work. And in others they already have some of the structures. So it's, yeah, that's our answers, I guess.
I'm so sorry, we are sadly running out of time now. There's important media interviews waiting also, and we are already a bit over time, but I suggest we continue the discussions over lunch, maybe.
Can you give us an example of questions that we got from
from our online audience? There's one very interesting question I want to choose for us here. What role does innovation play in this context and to address the crisis?
So, I mean, I think that there is masses of new technology or newish technology available which hasn't yet been taken up. It hasn't yet been invested in to scale properly. So I would say that the innovation which is required, and there is a lot required, is not about the technology. It's about how we think. We need to, the report is trying to tell us that we need to think about the crisis and also think beyond the crisis. So think fast, think long-term, and act now. It's trying to tell us, as I said just now, to expect the unexpected and to be ready to adapt. So a lot of emphasis on preparing, on preparation, on building resilience, but not just kind of getting locked in to a difficult place. If we're going to do things differently, which we clearly need to, we're going to have to think differently. And that's the heart of the innovation that we need.
Ivan Klima, in his book Love and Garbage, he wrote, and I wrote it down, of all the garbage that swamps us and threatens us by its breath of decay, The most dangerous is the masses of discarded ideas. So maybe that's what we have to change. Thank you all. Thank you for listening to us. We'll continue the conversation. Thank you, wonderful panelists.
Yeah,
and,
thank you, Margot.
Okay. And we are done.
Sorry, I went over time.
No. That was very important. Yeah.